Captain Jake Morrison was drinking his morning coffee when the universe changed forever. He sat in the command chair of the mining ship Endeavor, watching his crew work on pulling metal from a big rock near Jupiter. The coffee was bad as always, but Jake had gotten used to it after 3 years of mining runs. His ship was not fancy or new, just a working vessel that did its job without complaints. The first sign of something different came from the communications officer, Lisa Grant. She had been a scientist before joining the mining crew, and she knew how to read the strange signals that space sometimes threw at them. Lisa looked up from her screen with wide eyes and called out to Jake in a voice that shook just a little. "Captain, I am getting something weird here," she said, pointing at her display. "This is not natural noise or ship signals from Earth. This is something else, something that follows patterns I have never seen before." Jake walked over to look at the screen. The display showed waves of energy that pulsed in regular beats, like a heartbeat made of light. The signals came from empty space, from a direction where no human ships were supposed to be. Jake scratched his head and looked at the data again. Could be a broken satellite or maybe some kind of space junk sending out signals, Jake said. But even as he spoke, he knew this was not right. The patterns were too clean, too purposeful to be random noise. Then the screen changed. The random patterns became something that looked almost like language. Lisa worked fast on her computer, running the signals through every translation program she had. The ship's computer tried to make sense of the alien patterns, and slowly, very slowly, words began to appear on the screen. "Greetings, beings of the third planet. We come in peace to establish contact with your species. We are representatives of the Galactic Council of Civilized Worlds. Please respond if you can understand this message." Jake nearly dropped his coffee cup. Lisa stared at the screen like it might bite her. The rest of the crew had stopped working and gathered around the communications station. Nobody spoke for a long moment. "Well, I'll be damned," Jake finally said. "Aliens, real actual aliens, talking to us." Lisa found her voice first. "What do we do, Captain? This is first contact with an alien species. We should probably call Earth and let the government handle this." Jake thought about that for a moment. He could call Earth and wait for orders, but that would take hours. The aliens were talking to them right now, and it seemed rude to ignore them. His mother had raised him to be polite to visitors, even unexpected ones. "Lisa, can you send a message back to them?" Jake asked. Lisa nodded and started working on the communication system. "What should I tell them, Captain?" Jake sat back down in his chair and thought about what his mother would want him to say to visitors. Tell them hello back and ask them if they need any help, and ask them if they want some coffee. Lisa looked at him like he had lost his mind. "Captain, these are aliens from space. I don't think they drink coffee." "Maybe not," Jake said, "but it's the polite thing to ask. Besides, how do we know what they drink? They might love coffee." Lisa sent the message, and they waited. The reply came back faster than expected. "Thank you for your greeting. We are curious about this coffee you mention. We do not understand this reference. May we approach your vessel for direct communication?" Jake looked around at his crew. They were miners, not diplomats, but they were good people who knew how to treat others with respect. "Tell them they can come closer, but ask them to move slow so we don't get scared. And tell them we'll put the coffee pot on." The alien ship appeared an hour later. It was beautiful in a way that made Jake's old mining ship look like a rusty bucket. The alien vessel was smooth and white, with lines that flowed like water frozen in motion. It moved without making any noise that they could detect, sliding through space like a fish through water. Captain Jake Morrison had no idea that he was about to become the first human to confuse an alien diplomat. He had no way of knowing that. His simple offer of coffee would puzzle the representatives of 47 different species. All he knew was that visitors had come calling, and his job was to make them feel welcome. The communications panel lit up again with an incoming message. "We are Ambassador Zethkar of the Vorthic Empire, speaking for the Galactic Council. We request permission to board your vessel for formal first contact procedures." Jake smiled and picked up the microphone. "Sure thing. Ambassador, come on aboard. The coffee's almost ready." 3 months had passed since Ambassador Zethkar first met the humans, and he still could not understand them. He stood before the great assembly hall of the Galactic Council, looking out at representatives from 47 different species. All of them waited to hear his report about the strange new species from the small blue planet. The council chamber was huge, with seats arranged in circles that went up toward the ceiling. Each species had their own section, from the crystal-like Nexari who glowed with soft light, to the plant-based Alari who swayed gently even when sitting still. At the center of it all sat Chairman Velthara, her crystalline form casting rainbow patterns on the walls. Zefkar had given reports before about dozens of new species that the council had contacted over the centuries. Usually, these reports followed the same pattern. New species were either afraid, aggressive, or eager to please the powerful council. They showed respect, asked for protection, or tried to prove they were worthy of joining the galactic community. Humans did none of these things. Council members, Zefkar began. I must report that the species called humans present unique challenges to our understanding of intelligent life. Chairman Velthara's crystalline voice rang through the chamber. Please explain. Ambassador, what makes them unusual? Zefkar pulled up images from his first meeting with Captain Jake Morrison. The human had welcomed him aboard the mining ship with a smile and a cup of hot brown liquid, called coffee. Instead of formal greetings or ceremonies, Jake had asked if Zefkar needed directions and whether he had eaten dinner yet. When I arrived at their vessel, Zefkar said, the human captain treated me like a neighbor who had stopped by for a visit. He showed no fear of our superior technology. He did not ask about our weapons or military strength. Instead, he wanted to know if I was hungry. The war-focused Braxian representative stood up, his scaled form towering over the other delegates. Perhaps they are too primitive to understand the threat we could represent to them. Zefkar shook his head. That is what I thought at first, but I was wrong. Dr. Lisa Grant, their science officer, understood our technology perfectly. She asked detailed questions about our faster-than-light travel and showed genuine excitement about learning how it worked. But she was not afraid of us. She was curious. This caused murmurs throughout the assembly. The Alari delegate, a graceful being covered in flowing leaves, spoke up. Curiosity is normal when meeting new species. What troubles you about this? It is not just curiosity, Zefkar replied. When I showed them recordings of our military fleet, Captain Morrison whistled and said it was pretty impressive. Then he asked if we needed spare parts for our ships. The chamber fell silent. Every species represented in the council remembered their first sight of the council fleet. Some had surrendered immediately. Others had tried to negotiate. A few had panicked and tried to run. None had ever offered to help with maintenance. Chairman Velthara leaned forward, her crystalline features reflecting the light in sharp angles. Continue your report, Ambassador. Zefkar activated another display, showing images from his meetings with other humans. I was taken to meet their leaders on Earth. I expected formal ceremonies, careful negotiations about trade and treaties. Instead, I was invited to something called a barbecue in a place called Texas. The display showed humans cooking food over an open fire while children played nearby. Zefkar had been introduced to farmers, teachers, and mechanics as if he were any other guest at a family gathering. Nobody had asked him about the council's military power or territorial claims. The human leader, a woman named President Martinez, spent most of our meeting asking about other species in the galaxy. She wanted to know about our cultures, our histories, and our problems. When I told her about the ongoing war between the Thorak and the Zalani, she immediately asked if humans could help mediate. General Cronus of the Thorak delegation stood up, his forearms gesturing wildly. Humans offered to mediate our conflict. They know nothing of our ancient grievances. That is exactly what they said, Zefkar replied. President Martinez told me that not knowing the history might help them see solutions that others had missed. She said humans were good at solving problems by thinking differently. Dr. Amy Peters had arrived at the council station the week before, sent by Earth to study other species and learn about galactic civilization. Instead of showing the proper respect to superior beings, she had walked around introducing herself to everyone like she was at a social gathering. The human scientist Dr. Peters has been interviewing our citizens, Zefkar continued. She asks questions that no one has ever thought to ask. Yesterday, she asked a Braxian warrior about his hobbies. The warrior was so confused that he spent an hour explaining the concept of leisure time to her. The Braxian delegate shifted uncomfortably in his seat. The idea of a warrior having hobbies was nearly impossible for his species to understand. She also asked our historians to explain why certain conflicts had lasted so long without resolution, Zefkar said, when they finished their explanations. She suggested that maybe both sides should try talking to each other instead of fighting. Our historians did not know how to respond to such a simple suggestion. Commander Ryan Walsh had caused even more confusion when he arrived with gifts from Earth. He had brought music recordings, books translated into Galactic Standard, and containers of what he called barbecue sauce. The commander had handed out these gifts like party favors, asking nothing in return. The human military officer treats our station like a place to make friends, Zefkar said. He has organized what he calls movie nights, where humans show entertainment programs from their world. Half of our diplomatic staff now gathers in the recreation area to watch something called Star Wars while eating human food called popcorn. Chairman Velthara's form flickered with confusion. Ambassador, are you telling us that humans are treating the council station like a social club? That appears to be exactly what they are doing, Zefkar replied. And the most disturbing part is that it seems to be working. Species that have barely spoken to each other in centuries are now sitting together watching human movies and discussing their favorite characters. The assembly erupted in confused chatter. Representatives turned to each other, trying to understand how such casual behavior could be effective diplomacy. Zefkar raised his hand for silence. There is more. Humans appear to have no concept of proper fear responses. When faced with superior technology, military power, or ancient civilizations, they respond with interest rather than intimidation. They seem to believe that every problem can be solved and every situation can be improved. Chairman Velthara's voice carried a note of concern. What do you recommend, Ambassador? Zefkar looked around the assembly hall at all the confused and worried faces. I recommend that we prepare ourselves, council members. Humans are unlike any species we have ever encountered. They may change everything we think we know about galactic civilization. The Zephyrian hive had perfected intimidation over thousands of years. Their massive bioships looked like living nightmares, all teeth and claws grown from twisted flesh. When they wanted to make other species surrender, they sent the same message. That had worked on countless worlds. Resistance is futile. Your species will serve the hive or face extinction. You have one solar cycle to surrender unconditionally. The message went out to Earth on all frequencies, broadcast with enough power to reach every human settlement in the solar system. The hive expected panic, desperate negotiations, or immediate surrender. They had seen it all before. What they got back was completely different. Admiral Ben Carter was sitting in his office on the Earth Defense Station. When the alien threat arrived, he read the message twice, then called his communications officer. Get me a direct line to these Zephyrian folks, he said. I want to talk to whoever's in charge over there. The response from Earth came back within hours, and it began in a way that made the hive's collective consciousness pause in confusion. Hi there, Zephyrian Hive. Thanks for reaching out. This is Admiral Ben Carter speaking for Earth Defense Command. We're always excited to meet new neighbors, even ones who start conversations with threats. The hive had never received a response that thanked them for making threats. Their psychological warfare experts spent 3 days trying to understand what the humans meant. The message continued. We understand you folks like to take over planets, and that's your business. But Earth isn't available for conquest right now. However, we'd love to sit down and talk about mutual interests. How about we meet somewhere neutral and discuss this over a barbecue? We make great burgers. And I bet you've never tried our potato salad. The hive's war planners had prepared for every possible response except dinner invitations. They sent the message to their threat analysis division, who forwarded it to their xenopsychology department, who eventually gave up and sent it to their philosophers. While the Zephyrians tried to figure out what humans were thinking, chief engineer. Kate Murphy was working on her ship in the asteroid belt. The research vessel Discovery had been testing new engine designs when Kate noticed something interesting about the power flow patterns. "Hey, Tony," she called to her assistant. "Hand me that plasma regulator. I want to try something." Tony Rodriguez looked worried. Kate's ideas were usually brilliant, but they had a habit of exploding. "Kate, that regulator isn't designed to handle those power levels. The manual says it will overload." Kate grinned and started rewiring the engine system. "Manuals are written by people who never tried to make things work better. Trust me on this." 3 hours later, the Discovery was moving faster than any human ship had ever traveled before. Kate had somehow convinced the engines to work in ways that violated several basic laws of physics. When Council engineers examined her modifications, they found innovations that shouldn't have been possible. "How did you know this would work?" asked Dr. Vextar, the Council's chief technology advisor. Kate shrugged and wiped grease from her hands. "I didn't know it would work. I just thought it might, so I tried it." "That's how you figure things out, right?" Dr. Vextar had spent 100 years studying engine design. The idea of making random modifications just to see what happened was completely foreign to him. Council engineers tested everything thousands of times before making any changes. Humans apparently just tried stuff and hoped for the best. Meanwhile, Dr. Tony Rodriguez had been sent to mediate a peace talk between two species that had been fighting. For over 1,000 years, the Karate and the Venleri had been trying to destroy each other for so long that nobody remembered why the war had started. Tony arrived at the neutral station carrying a box of homemade cookies that his grandmother had taught him to make. The peace negotiations were supposed to be formal and serious, with carefully planned ceremonies and ancient protocols. Tony walked into the conference room, set the cookie box on the table, and said, "Hi everyone, I'm Tony. Before we start talking about your war, would anyone like a cookie, their chocolate chip?" The Karate delegation had spent weeks preparing speeches about honor and ancient grievances. The Venleri had brought detailed charts showing battle losses and territorial disputes. Neither side had prepared for cookies. The Karate ambassador, a proud warrior named General Thakmer, looked at the small human offering food to deadly enemies. "This is highly irregular. We are here to discuss terms of surrender, not to share meals." Tony took a bite of his cookie and nodded. "I get that. But fighting for 1,000 years sounds exhausting. When I'm tired and cranky, cookies always help. Besides, it's hard to stay mad at someone when you're eating something delicious." The Venleri representative, a graceful being called Sage Yelandra, reached for a cookie almost without thinking. She had not eaten anything sweet in months of preparation for these negotiations. The taste was unlike anything in her experience. "These are quite good," she admitted, then looked surprised at herself for accepting food from a stranger. General Thakmer watched his ancient enemy eating cookies and offering positive comments. This was not how peace talks were supposed to work. There should be formal accusations, demands for reparations, and threats of renewed warfare. Instead, Tony was asking questions like, "So what do you folks actually want out of this whole situation? And have you tried just talking to each other instead of shooting?" 3 hours later, both sides had forgotten to be angry. They were too busy trying to explain to Tony why their conflict was so complicated. But every time they started discussing ancient grievances, Tony would ask simple questions like, "But what would happen if you just stopped fighting?" The 1,000-year war ended when General Thakmer and Sage Yelandra realized they had been fighting over a planet that neither side actually wanted anymore. Tony's suggestion that they just share it and see what happens seemed reasonable after several cookies and 2 hours of friendly conversation. Colonel Sarah Davis caused the Council's military analysts their biggest headache when she submitted Earth's military history for review. The report was supposed to help the Council understand human combat capabilities and defensive strategies. Instead, it raised more questions than it answered. According to this data, reported Council military advisor Kelthos, humans have fought constant wars throughout their history, but they also have the fastest post-conflict recovery rates we have ever recorded. The military Council studied human battle records with growing confusion. Humans fought with desperate courage when facing overwhelming odds, but they also had a disturbing habit of making friends with former enemies. Immediately after defeating them, they defeated the Japanese Empire in a massive war. Kelthos continued, then helped rebuild Japan into one of their strongest allies. They fought a civil war that nearly destroyed their country, then reunited and became stronger than before. These patterns make no sense according to standard military psychology. The most troubling part of Colonel Davis's report was her analysis of human attitudes toward impossible odds. Where other species saw certain defeat, humans saw interesting challenges. Where others calculated acceptable losses, humans looked for creative solutions that minimized casualties. We don't like to lose people, Colonel Davis explained to the confused military advisors. So when the odds are bad, we get creative. Sometimes the craziest plan works better than the safe one. The Council's greatest strategic minds had spent centuries perfecting the art of warfare. They had detailed plans for every possible scenario, backup strategies for every contingency, and careful calculations for acceptable losses. Humans apparently just made things up as they went along and somehow won anyway. The darkness came from beyond the edge of known space, bringing with it a terror that had consumed 17 galaxies. The Void Seekers had no interest in negotiation, no need for resources, and no mercy for the living. Their black ships moved through space like holes cut from reality itself, leaving nothing but emptiness where civilizations used to be. The first Council fleets to encounter them simply vanished. No distress calls, no battle reports, just empty space where proud warships had been moments before. The few automated probes that survived long enough to transmit data showed images that made hardened warriors wake up screaming. Chairman Velthara called an emergency session of the Council's military command. The Great War Room filled with the finest strategic minds from 47 species, all of them trying to find a way to stop an enemy that seemed unstoppable. The Void Seekers advance on 7 fronts, reported Admiral Kresh of the Thoric Fleet. Our best estimates give us 6 months before they reach the core worlds. Every defense we have tried has failed. General Ulovics of the Crystal Nexari activated the tactical display, showing Void Seeker movements across 3 star systems. They do not respond to weapons fire. Our most powerful ships might as well be throwing rocks at them. They absorb energy attacks and seem to grow stronger from them. The assembled military leaders looked at the display with growing despair. The Council had faced threats before, but nothing like this. The Void Seekers moved with purpose and intelligence, but they could not be reasoned with, bribed, or intimidated. Captain Jim Foster was not invited to the military planning sessions, which was probably for the best. Jim commanded the Earth ship Defiant, a small vessel that the Council's admirals considered barely worthy of patrol duty, while the great minds of galactic warfare planned their careful defensive strategies. Jim was in his quarters reading reports and drinking coffee. Helen, he called to his science officer. Come take a look at this data about these Void Seeker things. Dr. Helen Brooks floated over in the low-gravity section of the ship, carrying a tablet loaded with every piece of information Earth had gathered about the enemy. Helen had a habit of looking at problems from angles that made more experienced scientists uncomfortable. The Council keeps calling them unstoppable, Helen said. But that doesn't make sense. Nothing is really unstoppable. There's always a way to break something if you understand how it works. Jim nodded and pulled up the tactical reports. So what do you think? How do we figure out how they work? Helen grinned in a way that usually meant trouble. We go poke around and see what makes them tick. Can't understand something from a distance. Right. This was exactly the kind of thinking that made Council military advisors nervous about humans. While they prepared defensive lines and evacuation plans, Jim Foster was planning to fly directly into enemy territory to conduct what he called aggressive reconnaissance. The Defiant left Earth space without telling anyone where they were going. Jim's plan, such as it was, involved getting close enough to a Void Seeker ship to skin it properly. Helen wanted to collect data on their technology, their methods, and hopefully their weaknesses. This is either going to be really educational or really short. Jim told his crew as they approached the outer edge of Void Seeker space. Lieutenant Commander Steve Parker commanded the Defiant's small Marine unit. Steve had read every military manual the Council had provided about proper combat tactics, then decided that most of them were probably wrong. His approach to warfare could best be described as aggressive improvisation. If we're doing this, Steve told his Marines, we're going to do it right. That means we adapt, we improvise, and we don't let these things scare us. They might be from beyond space or whatever, but they still have to follow the same rules of physics as everyone else. Private First Class Nancy Green was the ship's chief mechanic, and she had been listening to recordings of Void Seeker ships with growing interest. Nancy had grown up fixing trucks and farm equipment in rural Kansas, and she had developed an ear for mechanical problems. Lieutenant, Nancy said to Steve, these Void Seeker ships make a weird humming noise. It reminds me of my old pickup truck. When the transmission was going bad. Steve looked at her with interest. Nancy's mechanical insights had saved the ship more than once during their previous missions. What kind of transmission problems? Nancy pulled up the audio recordings and played them through the ship's speakers. Listen to that rhythm. It's not steady. There's a little skip every few seconds, like something's not quite lined up right. In a truck, that usually means the gears are wearing out. Helen overheard the conversation and came over to listen. As a scientist, she was trained to analyze complex data using sophisticated instruments, but Nancy's simple observation about familiar mechanical sounds opened up new possibilities. Nancy, if you're right about mechanical problems, Helen said, that means these ships might have vulnerable points we can exploit. Show me exactly what you're hearing. The Defiant found its first Void Seeker vessel drifting near a destroyed Council outpost. The alien ship looked like a piece of space that had been carved away from reality. But Nancy's mechanical instincts were stronger than her fear. There, she said, pointing at the enemy ship, you hear that? That's definitely a mechanical problem. Something inside that thing is working too hard and wearing itself out. Jim made a command decision that would have horrified Council strategists. Instead of maintaining a safe distance and gathering data, he ordered the Defiant to move closer to the enemy vessel. If they were going to understand these things, they needed better information. The Void Seeker ship detected their approach and began to turn toward them, its weapons charged with energy that made space itself seem to bend and twist. Everything about the alien vessel screamed danger and death. Nancy kept listening to the mechanical sounds. Captain, I think I know what their problem is. They're running too hot. All that energy they absorb from attacking other ships has to go somewhere, and I think their cooling systems can't keep up. Helen ran the idea through her scientific analysis programs. Nancy might be onto something. If they're overheating, they might have thermal exhaust ports or cooling vents that could be vulnerable. To attack, Steve grinned and checked his weapons. So we find their exhaust port and stick something explosive in it. Jim laughed despite the danger they were in. Steve, that's either the stupidest plan I've ever heard or the most brilliant. Nancy, can you find us their exhaust port? Nancy studied the enemy ship like it was a broken tractor that needed fixing. Give me a few minutes. Captain, every machine has to vent heat somewhere, and this thing is definitely running hot. The Defiant danced around the Void Seeker vessel, dodging energy blasts that could have destroyed them instantly. Nancy guided them toward what she insisted was the alien ship's weak point, a section that didn't look any different from the rest of the vessel, but sounded wrong to her experienced ears. There, Nancy said, pointing at a spot on the enemy hull. Right there is where they're venting excess heat. Hit that spot and I bet their whole cooling system fails. Steve fired a single torpedo at the coordinates Nancy had identified. The explosion was small, barely visible against the massive alien vessel. For a moment, nothing seemed to happen. Then the Void Seeker ship began to glow with internal heat. Sections of its hull started to buckle and warp as thermal stress overwhelmed its structure. Within minutes, the entire vessel had torn itself apart from internal overheating. Jim stared at the expanding debris field in amazement. Nancy, I think you just figured out how to kill something that everyone said was unkillable. Helen was already analyzing the data from their attack. If Nancy's right about their cooling problems, every Void Seeker ship should have the same vulnerability. We need to get this information back to Earth immediately. The Defiant headed home with the most important military intelligence in galactic history, discovered by a mechanic from Kansas who thought alien warships sounded like broken pickup trucks. The Council's emergency session had been going for 3 days straight, and they were no closer to a solution. The greatest military minds of 47 species sat in their chambers, debating surrender terms and evacuation plans. Outside, the Void Seekers continued their advance, consuming star systems like a spreading plague. While the Council argued about acceptable losses and strategic retreats, humans were building something in the asteroid belt between Mars and Jupiter. Chief Engineer Rick Thompson had commandeered every mining ship, construction vessel, and salvage crew he could find. What they were building didn't appear on any Council technical manuals. Rick called it the contraption because nobody could think of a better name. It looked like someone had taken parts from 100 different ships and welded them together, without any regard for proper engineering. Council observers who saw the construction photos were horrified by the complete lack of standardized components. This device violates every principle of safe engineering, reported Council Technical Advisor Mexither after reviewing the human plans. The power systems are incompatible, the structural supports are insufficient, and the whole design appears to be held together by what humans call hope and duct tape. Rick Thompson had been an engineer for 23 years, and he had learned that sometimes the best solution was the one that worked, not the one that looked pretty. The contraption was ugly, dangerous, and completely insane. It was also humanity's best chance of stopping the Void Seekers. General Patricia Moore stood before the Council Assembly, trying to explain a plan that made sense to humans, but seemed like madness. To everyone else, Patricia had spent her career dealing with impossible situations, and she approached the Void Seeker crisis like any other problem that needed solving. Council members, Patricia began, we propose to take the fight directly to the Void Seeker home base. Instead of waiting for them to reach our worlds, we're going to end this war at its source. The assembly erupted in confused chatter. Admiral Kresh of the Thoric Fleet stood up, his forearms waving in agitation. General Moore, our scouts estimate that the Void Seeker home base contains over 10,000 ships. You're proposing to attack an enemy stronghold with a handful of vessels. Patricia nodded calmly. That's about right, Admiral, but we're not planning a traditional assault. We're going to use their psychology against them. Chairman Valthara's crystalline form flickered with confusion. Please explain, General. How can you use psychology against beings that seem to have no emotions or individual thoughts? Dr. Kevin Lewis stepped forward to answer. Kevin was Earth's best theoretical physicist, and he had been studying Void Seeker behavior patterns for weeks. His analysis had revealed something that the Council's experts had missed. The Void Seekers conquer through fear and overwhelming force. Kevin explained with the cheerful tone he used for all his lectures. They expect their enemies to be terrified and desperate. They've never faced opponents who refuse to be intimidated. Kevin activated a display showing Void Seeker attack patterns. Look at their tactics. They always attack the strongest enemy first, because destroying the most powerful opponent breaks the will of everyone else. But what happens when the enemy isn't impressed by superior numbers? The Council military advisors studied the data with growing comprehension. The Void Seekers had used the same strategy for thousands of years because it always worked. Species saw their massive fleets and either surrendered immediately or fought hopeless defensive battles. You're proposing to ignore their psychological warfare, Admiral Kresh said slowly. But General, they still have 10,000 ships. Psychology won't protect you from their weapons. Patricia smiled in a way that made several Council members nervous. Admiral, we're not ignoring their psychological warfare. We're turning it around on them. The Void Seekers have never had anyone show up at their front door and challenge them to a fair fight. The human fleet that departed for the Void Seeker stronghold was small by galactic standards. Admiral Carol Turner commanded the operation from the battleship Indomitable, leading a force of 30 ships against an enemy that outnumbered them more than 300 to 1. Every Council military expert agreed that the mission was suicide. The humans were walking into certain death, and they seemed genuinely excited about it. This is Admiral Turner to all ships. Carol broadcast as the human fleet approached the edge of Void Seeker space. Everyone remember what we're here to do. We're going to kick down their front door, break their favorite toys, and show them what happens when you mess with our neighbors. Captain Doug Miller commanded the escort vessel Ranger, and he was responsible for protecting the contraption during its final approach. Doug had read every tactical manual about desperate last stands and impossible missions. Most of them recommended making peace with death before engaging superior forces. Doug had never been good at following recommendations. Ranger to Indomitable, he radioed to Admiral Turner. We're picking up massive energy readings from the Void Seeker fleet. Looks like they're powering up to give us the full welcome treatment. Admiral Turner's voice came back calm and confident. Copy that, Doug. Let them power up. The more energy they put into intimidating us, the better our plan works. The Void Seeker home base was a nightmare of twisted metal and dark energy that stretched across an entire star system. Thousands of black ships moved in perfect formation, their weapons charging with power that made space itself ripple and bend. The sight of so much concentrated death should have sent any sane species running for their lives. The human fleet accelerated directly toward the center of enemy formation. Rick Thompson monitored the contraption from the engineering vessel workshop, watching power readings that should have been impossible. The device was drawing energy from sources that Council scientists insisted didn't exist, converting it into forms that violated several laws of physics. Admiral, Rick reported, the contraption is ready. All power systems are green, structural integrity is holding, and the duct tape is still sticky. Admiral Turner laughed despite the danger they were flying into. Rick, if we survive this, I'm recommending you for a medal. If we don't survive, I'm blaming the whole thing on you. The Void Seekers responded to the human approach exactly as Kevin Lewis had predicted. They formed up into their most intimidating battle formation, powered their weapons to maximum, and broadcast their standard message of inevitable doom. Captain Doug Miller received the Void Seeker surrender demand and responded with characteristic human confidence. Void Seeker Fleet, this is Captain Miller of the Earth Vessel Ranger. We're here to shut down your operation and send you folks home. You can surrender now, or we can do this the hard way. Either option works for us. The message that came back from the Void Seekers was pure rage and confusion. No species had ever offered them terms of surrender. No enemy had ever suggested that the mighty Void Seeker fleet should give up without a fight. Don't worry, folks. Doug broadcast to his crew as the enemy fleet began its attack run. We've got this. How hard could it be? The confidence in his voice when facing certain death captured everything about human nature that confused and amazed the galaxy. Doug Miller was about to fight impossible odds with outdated equipment and a plan that barely made sense, and he sounded like he was looking forward to it. The battle of the Void Seeker stronghold was about to begin, and humanity was treating it like just another day at the office. The impossible victory should have made everything clear, but it only made humans more confusing than before. 3 weeks after the Void Seekers retreated to whatever dark dimension they came from, the Council was still trying to understand what had happened. Captain Bobby Turner returned from the mission that saved 17 galaxies and immediately submitted a request for shore leave. His official report stated that defeating an ancient cosmic evil had been pretty stressful, and his crew needed to decompress with some fishing. Chairman Velthara read the report 3 times before calling Admiral Turner to her office. Admiral, your fleet just accomplished the greatest military victory in galactic history. The Council wishes to hold formal celebrations, award ceremonies, and establish monuments to honor your achievement. Admiral Turner politely declined all offers of parades and medals. That's very kind of you, Chairman, but the folks back home are planning a cookout to celebrate, and that sounds a lot better than speeches and ceremonies. You're welcome to come if you want. We're making hamburgers. The Council's attempts to understand the human victory were complicated by Dr. Maria Santos and her official analysis of the battle. Maria had been aboard the Indomitable as a science observer, and her report was supposed to explain human tactical innovations to Council military academies. Instead, it raised more questions than it answered. The success of Operation Contraption can be attributed to three primary factors. Maria wrote in her report. First, excellent teamwork between crew members who trusted each other completely. Second, creative problem solving that ignored conventional limitations. Third, really good coffee that kept everyone alert during the long mission. Military historians from across the galaxy downloaded Maria's report, hoping to understand how 30 human ships had defeated 10,000 Void Seeker vessels. What they found was a scientific paper that credited victory to teamwork, creativity, and caffeine. The battle itself had been unlike anything in recorded military history. When the Void Seeker fleet attacked, expecting to crush human resistance through overwhelming force, they encountered something they had never seen before: enemies who weren't afraid of dying. Rick Thompson's contraption had worked exactly as planned, which was a miracle since nobody had been completely sure what it was supposed to do. The device had somehow converted Void Seeker weapons' energy into a feedback pulse that overloaded their entire fleet's power systems. I'm still not entirely sure how it worked, Rick admitted in his engineering report. We took their energy, ran it through some modifications, and sent it back to them really fast. It's like they were trying to scare us with a really loud noise. So we built a microphone that made the noise even louder and pointed it back at them. Council scientists spent months trying to understand Rick's technical specifications. The contraption had been built using principles that violated established physics, powered by energy sources that shouldn't exist, and operated by an engineering crew that thought instruction manuals were suggestions. The most detailed analysis came from Dr. Vextar, the Council's chief technology expert, who had examined the contraption's remains after the battle. His conclusion was both scientific and philosophical. Human engineering appears to work on the principle that if something should be possible, then it probably is possible, and the only way to find out is to try it, Dr. Vextar reported. This approach produces devices that our computers say cannot function, but which work perfectly anyway. The Void Seekers themselves had been so confused by human tactics that they had retreated to their home dimension to reconsider their approach. Their final message before disappearing had been a request for humanity to please fight more logically next time. Commander Frank Davis was appointed as Earth's permanent representative to the Council, a position that came with significant diplomatic responsibilities and access to classified galactic intelligence. Frank accepted the job by saying it sounded pretty cool and asked if the Council cafeteria served decent pizza. Frank's first official act was to establish Pizza Fridays in the Council chambers, a weekly event where representatives from different species could gather informally and discuss problems over shared meals. The idea horrified diplomatic protocol experts, but proved surprisingly effective at resolving minor conflicts. It's hard to stay mad at someone when you're both trying to figure out how to eat pizza without making a mess, Frank explained to confused Council observers. The weekly pizza gatherings led to more cooperation between species than formal diplomatic conferences had achieved in decades. Representatives who had barely spoken to each other for centuries found themselves comparing favorite toppings and sharing stories about their home worlds. The Council's final session of the year was dedicated to addressing what they had come to call the human question. After months of observation, analysis, and interaction, they were no closer to understanding humanity's place in galactic civilization. We have encountered a species that treats impossible challenges like interesting puzzles, Chairman Velthara announced to the Assembly. They solve problems by ignoring the fact that those problems cannot be solved. They make friends with former enemies, offer help to strangers, and respond to threats with dinner invitations. The Xenopsychology department had given up trying to create a predictive model for human behavior. Dr. Kex Moon, the Council's leading expert on alien minds, submitted a report that was remarkably honest about their limitations. Humans appear to operate on the assumption that any problem can be solved if you approach it with sufficient optimism and creativity, the report stated. This assumption is scientifically invalid, logically unsound, and demonstrably incorrect. It also seems to work consistently well for them. The military analysis was equally baffling. General Cronus of the Thorak delegation had spent months studying human combat records, trying to understand their tactical innovations. Human military doctrine can be summarized as follows. Cronus reported, "When faced with superior enemies, find a creative way to win. When faced with impossible odds, try something that has never been done before. When conventional weapons fail, build something new that probably shouldn't work but does anyway." The economic experts were just as confused. Human trade practices ignored established galactic commerce protocols, but somehow resulted in profitable partnerships for everyone involved. Human negotiators seemed more interested in making sure everyone benefited than in maximizing their own advantages. They appear to believe that successful trade relationships should make all parties happy, reported Trade Commissioner Yulsith. This approach is economically naive, but produces remarkably stable partnerships. As the year ended, the Council reached a conclusion that was both simple and incomprehensible. They had encountered a species that saved galaxies while asking for nothing in return, solved ancient conflicts with cookies and conversation, and treated the most dangerous enemies in the universe like interesting engineering problems. Chairman Velthara's final statement captured the essence of the Council's relationship with humanity. "We have tried for one full year to understand the species from the small blue planet. We have studied their history, analyzed their behavior, and observed their methods. Our conclusion is that humans remain completely incomprehensible to us." The Assembly Hall fell silent as representatives from 47 species considered this admission of defeat. However, Velthara continued, "We have also concluded that this may be exactly what the galaxy needs. Humans see solutions where we see problems. They find hope where we see despair. They offer friendship where we expect conflict." The Council voted unanimously to grant humanity full membership status, not because they understood human nature, but because they had learned to trust it. "We may never understand how humans think," Velthara concluded, "but we are grateful that they think differently than we do. The galaxy is a better place because of their presence. Even if we cannot explain why, in the end, the Council accepted what they could not comprehend. Humanity remained the species they couldn't understand, and perhaps that was exactly why the universe needed them." Frank Davis received the news of humanity's Council membership while eating pizza in his office. His response was characteristically human. He called his mom to tell her the good news, then organized a celebration party and invited everyone he knew. The party lasted 3 days and somehow turned into an informal diplomatic conference that resolved several minor territorial disputes and established trade agreements between species that had never worked together before. Nobody was surprised anymore. That was just how humans did things.